Hey everybody, this is Nyan Kong. I've been listening in for the last 20 minutes while I was jotting down notes. Um, I had a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions because I love this discussion, and it's actually in line with exactly what I've been thinking of for many months. And getting your feedback about this can help shape the direction that I take. Um, so it's at least in terms of my ideation of things. So I think I'm going to start with Master Yang, your concept of the simplicity and being intriguing and building on that. But I also want to follow up on Addison's points about, and others too, about building on this foundation in the world, in the realm that's, a year and a half coming later. And what does that mean? Because my background is predominantly entertainment development for games. So when I think of a game experience, I think of more crafted stuff that's a mix between an open world and a storyline mode like Grand Theft Auto kind of stuff. And so I'm really curious to hear your guys and gals and whomever's take on that concept, because if you take the foundation of this experience, for example, where it's at its core, it's an investment mechanism. It's a return on your investment, your Aavegotchis that you care for and you supplement and build on, and then consequently with the realm, the land parcels that you buy, and then as you build on those and you collect alchemica and all that, you're basically doing this sort of like a Farmville with return on investment. And that's not my background. Where I come from is like building epic bosses and enemy characters and mechanics for players so that you can work together and do stuff in the moment, in visceral gameplay moments, as opposed to clicking a button and waiting, but then you get a return on something and then mixing all that, like, for example, Clash of Clans. Love that, by the way. But where do you guys see this game experience going? Because on the one hand, when I look at it, I think, okay, I think you're right in its simplicity. There's elegance there, and you're providing like a sandbox for people to build on, whether it's sharing their creations. Like there was discussion about the NFTs, like your graphics, your animations, or your music videos, or your insert the blank stuff there. And then there's all the guild work where you can customize things and vote on the DAO to make your areas within the realm aesthetically more to your liking. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that's basically, if you provide some Legos, people can build stuff. And I totally get that. But where do you see the crafted stuff coming in? Or do you even see that? Like, let me give you an example. So let's say you're in the realm and everybody's happy and chilling and socializing. Shadow sliding in from somewhere. You don't even know where it is or what it is. And the shadow's huge. And you're like, what the fuck is that? What is that shadow? What does it mean? That's an example of an event that doesn't have anything to do with, you're building your parcel and all that stuff, but it's starting to build some intrigue, and there's some narrative there that could lead somewhere. And so then all of a sudden people are starting to talk about it, and then maybe a week later or 2 weeks later, you start to notice there's cracks in the ground around the areas where the shadow has moved. And then you start to speculate, well, what does that mean? Blah, 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 blah. So you see where I'm going with this, where this can lead to something more tangible, but it's sort of a crafted experience in that respect that people can do whatever they want to. But that's kind of where I'm hoping. But at the same time, I want to hear what you guys are thinking, because if you're not seeing it in that respect and seeing it more of the investment side of things and being able to have a blank slate that you can create on, that's totally viable, but that's a very different direction. So with that, I'll hand the mic over.
I would say, speaking for myself, because I approach this, I'm into it for the game, but I also approach it for the investment part. So that crafted experience, I enjoy it as long as, if I see a dark cloud coming up, the first thing I thought when you were describing that is like, oh crap, is this going to be am I going to lose some wearables? Do I have to take my really slow, very valuable gotchi and run away now because something bad is happening? And that puts some anxiety in me, which is probably good for the emotional user experience, as long as it doesn't actually affect my bag. That I think it's really cool, and that you could build on that to give everything more of an aesthetic flair.
I could speak on Really interesting question, by the way, too. Really thoughtful. And I think it leaves the discussion open to a lot of different things. For me personally, I think having the way I think of it is like a global us versus them kind of event, the way you described it. It's like no matter what guild you're in, no matter where you are in the world or how many parcels you own, this is an event that will affect everybody. And maybe there'll be some sort of collaboration that will need to be required to overcome these events. Kind of like the Great Portal Battle is like another example. Like the great battles that will happen are like these us versus them events. And I think what that will do for the community is it'll really unite the community and create more of that community collaboration in order to overcome these events. And like, again, tying into what No Future said, maybe there can be some loss, but maybe not a loss in a way that it affects people who may have invested large sums of money or bought wearables or whatnot. But I do believe in being able to craft items for example, for a quest, maybe to defeat whatever the shadow is, whatever's behind the shadow, you need like a special set of goggles or something to see it, and you have to craft those. And then maybe you have to burn a little bit of alchemica to make those goggles for that one thing that only work with that one thing that allow you to see whatever that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. Want to interject with another question. The way a lot of the game is structured, at least in the publicly released stuff, is basically it's a single player experience that allows you to interact with other single players to create the multiplayer experience. Meaning you're crafting your singular gotchi that you own, you're populating your parcels that you own, you're doing all this stuff for yourself, and you can interact with other players, but you're basically playing a single player game there around other players that are doing the same thing. And then you can assist people in ways like in the future going on raids, for instance. You can, with guilds, that's going to be another area. So another question that I have, without going too far down that, is do you to continue that single player type infrastructure, because that does allow you control in your investment and all that stuff, which totally makes sense. But or do you see complementing that in ways, for example, let's say the two of us could co-pilot something together, where that's like true multiplayer, where we have to work together in order to do this thing. Classic examples like driver and gunner in a game where somebody's doing the driving and somebody's doing the gunner, but you're both a single unit that's moving together. That's the kind of stuff that personally really excites me, that I really want to go towards with this, with a strong foundation of all the single player elements so that it's fun and there isn't threats to your investment that don't make any sense and all that stuff. That's kind of the direction I'd like to go in, but I'd like to hear what you all think.
Yeah, I think to touch on some of these points, I think it's a both and type of situation. It's not, I mean, some situations where you can go out and do like single player like quests or games, or maybe it's a game that someone builds on their parcel, or a game that you guys set up in Pixelcraft Square that's a single player, or a gunner game, or two-person game. But in terms of the greater metaverse experience, ideally you want to do something where it's, I mean, everyone is doing something together, and there's options out maybe in the grid that to do like group battles or whatever it looks like to do what does it look like to do a massive multiplayer game, like an MMORPG. I know, so in terms of the direction, in terms of like the Clash of Clans direction, I think that you still need to have that balance with people that want to have that type of gameplay. So it's like, I mean, so then that kind of like builds the infrastructure of like, okay, what does that look like? But you also don't want it to be so stagnant that like, okay, everyone's building the same structures and everyone's parcels look the same, so everywhere you go looks exactly the same and there's no difference. And to be able to compete with metaverses like Sandbox, like Decentraland, for two big examples, their big draw is the ability to customize your land to make it your own experience, your own style, make it yours. And I think there needs to be a balance between the lore and the gameplay and the quests and needs to be all that kind of like drive of like, okay, what are we kind of like building up towards, while also having the side of like creative freedom. So a good example like this would be like Minecraft, where you can do whatever you want, but then there's also an end game of where you can go defeat the Ender Dragon. So it's kind of like this balance between all of them. I know it's a little long-winded and not a like. It probably will
I get your
require a
point.
lot more work.
Yeah,
That's
that's one of the challenges is if you make an experience that's focused, you can polish it more. But the second you start adding in like, well, then we can have, in addition to moving around and collecting stuff, you can also fight. And in addition to fighting, you can also, you start adding these things, and it exponentially increases the complexity of development. But also it can be, if you're not planning it properly, can box you in a corner in the future. So this whole foundation that's been built, that we're continuing to build, and as we release stuff, and as we get feedback and everybody gets involved like this, some things are going to be more difficult than others to change later. So keeping the simplicity, I think, is an important aspect of this, whether it's single player stuff or multiplayer centric. The safest way to go with all this is make it can equip with your character. It's all based on what you invest with it. And then you can also do that with other people. That's why most games do that, because it's easier. And it makes sense because it gives you personal control over your assets, and then you can choose to interact with somebody else. So that's most likely going to be the way that we progress, but I definitely want to get some... Sorry?
Have you done a case study on RuneScape? That's
Dreams?
Like RuneScape, R-U-N-E-Scape.
Yeah.
C-A-P. Like old school RuneScape in particular. They kind of like made some advancements and the community went back, but I think that was a low like fidelity way of like creating a greater metaverse experience where you have everything like what you're explaining, where you can go off and do like individual single player quests, but then you're also in a greater metaverse where everyone else is also doing those quests. They had to what Coderdana said is that you guys are trying to do a one server type situation. So you can still have those quests in the single player modes, and then maybe you got those plugins where you go into those like individual games, like similar to what we have in the arcade right now, or the mini games. But yeah, I think it would be really good to do look into that game if you haven't already. I'm sure you've heard of it, being in the game sphere. Like it's been around for I think over 20 years. So I think that in terms of the greater metaverse, I don't think in MMORPG, other than maybe World of Warcraft, but they kind of had I don't know, they're all right, but in terms of you can go do whatever you want, but you still have different quests and you can kind of make up your own story. I think that's the best kind of case study that at least I've been personally since I was young. That's kind of what I grew up with and basing a lot of my development on personal projects on.
Just creating other items. Oh, that's something that is it's controversial, but I think one way to be able to create another item in the game, or to create something special in the game, is to, like Addison said, have these quests, because it requires you to put in a significant amount of effort and thought and skill into obtaining these items, and so they're not just something anybody can make. It has to be a process. You have to go on a small hero's journey through a bunch of series of quests to even get access to create the item, and then maybe a certain amount of alchemica or whatever needs to be used to create the item. But then for the current items can also, have a significant utility in the game through gating, I call them gating functions. They might be called something else, but just you need this X wearable in order to do this X task or to beat this monster. And I think that's how we can introduce some of that driver and gunner dynamic, where we have, one person who maybe needs wizard staff in order to do the quest. And those might be ways to kind of get players to work together and also create a rental economy around the wearables themselves. Because let's say I want to do this godlike quest. Well, hey, I can't afford a godlike item, but the reward for doing that godlike quest is quite significant. Hey, why don't I spend a couple ghost, rent the godlike item from somebody, go do the quest with somebody else who needs X item, and then, get the reward for both of us.
Cool.
I will say, your question you were asking about single player versus that multiplayer aspect, and I was always under the impression that multiplayer stuff that would be introduced would be kind of like someone used the term plugin, but I'm thinking like mini game development by community members since they're ecosystem grants. So it's like while Pixelcraft focuses on the game itself, I think it's also like I've always thought that a large part of the focus is also on the SDK part of it, building the experience on our parcels where like, mini game developers can then create those multiplayer games to take some of the bandwidth off of Pixelcraft so they can continue to basically build that Web3 infrastructure that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, that's a good point. The question then becomes, though, how integrated does that experience feel? Because on the one hand, traditionally, if you activate a mini game and now it's like, hey, we're in outer space and shooting gotchis with fireballs or whatever, that's cool and that could be fun, but it takes you out of the space that you're into, like you're going into a movie theater and you're experiencing something different now, which is fine and it's a perfectly viable addition to the universe. But and I fully expect us to continue doing that and integrating that more into the actual realm experience for sure. But I'm thinking more along experience itself. And Hefe, you brought up a good point about, so maybe quests require certain wearables or certain configurations of character traits are things that complement each other. And they're designed in such a way that you couldn't possibly do it alone. That's one way to encourage it. I'm always a fan of that of difference between the characters, because to make a truly balanced game, you really end up making it homogenous where everybody feels the same. Because if you really want balance, that's the only way to truly get it. Otherwise, that's why it's so difficult for games to achieve that balance. And then people complain about this thing being OP and whatever. So it's a constant struggle between how do you get the variety versus how do you get the balance that everybody wants. So that might be an interesting way to make the variety something that's attainable by different players. It's just that you need different combinations of that in order to achieve it. But I still want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan has said it before that there needs to be some tension in the world. It's not like, oh, everybody's peace and harmony all the time and nobody steals from anybody, nobody ever starts beef with anybody. I feel like that would just be a really boring game, to be honest. I feel like there needs to be some win-lose component to the game to get people going a little bit without maybe, without obviously significantly impacting their personal investments. But it is difficult, because it's not like a typical Web 2 game where you don't have to take the economics into account because it's like, hey, whatever, if we mess up the economics, then we'll just tweak this and that and nobody lost anything because we own all the game items, right?
Yeah, it's like games where you can equip your character, but it doesn't actually change your character's strength. It's just aesthetic. Imagine doing that in the opposite direction. Like, hey, congratulations, you completed this thing. You get a happy face. And you're like, what? That's all I get? Or you do the opposite. Like, you failed. You get a sad face. Then you're like, well, none of this really affects anything. That's not fun either. That brings up an interesting point, which when I joined the team last year, I don't know, 10 months ago, 9 months ago, something like that. That was one of the first questions I asked because the characters, as has been mentioned, they're so appealing and they're sort of childlike naivete, their simplicity, and they're so happy. And the community is so supportive and generally happy. I mean, we're all humans and we have bad days and stuff, but generally it's a super non-toxic community. And one of the issues that everybody is well aware of is the toxicity that can be online, keyboard warriors and everything, basically just a lack of respect. And that's something that's so refreshing about this community. So I asked Golden Cross and Coder Dan, I said, the ability to steal and hurt other people and all that stuff, but you're also going down the road that pretty much every other game goes down, which ultimately tends to lead to the toxicity, where that competition can bring out the worst in people. So how do you maintain the supportive nature of this community while still offering an interesting experience that has some texture to it? So that's an interesting challenge that I think we're going to be overcoming bit by bit as developers and as a community as we build this thing, because the worst case scenario would be, we head down that path where this wonderful community that we have starts, turning stinky, which I don't see that happening. But, if the game experience promotes the ability to go in that direction, the more and more people there are, the harder it's going to be to sort of maintain this benevolence.
And when you say it brings out the worst in people, it really, really does. And I mean, even more so than like those typical making in the game on the play to earn aspect as actual income. And what happened, a good little example of that was what happened to the SLP, the small love potion rewards, which are used for breeding axes. So you win SLP tokens when you're fighting in the game, but what that did is inflate the supply of SLP like crazy, because people in the Philippines would buy like 20 phones and they get like 20 teams of axes, and they just have one guy punching all the card game things, right? Generating SLP, and then generating like 3,000 to 4,000 SLP in a month, and then maybe he feeds his family with that or something. Mm-hmm. And then what happened is the price of SLP crashed to like 1 penny, or I don't even know what it's at now, like 3 or 4 cents. And then basically to balance that out, they had to adjust the game mechanics and adjust the amount of rewards, SLP rewards, that were given out. And it was like the backlash from the community, even though it was really good for the game, like it started to fix the game a little bit. The backlash was like, my mom can't eat now because like you crushed the SLP reward. And I mean, that's another conversation, whether that's something good or not, but some people got reliant on that income. They got used to that, making that amount of money based on the token value. And then when the tokenomics were adjusted to benefit the game, a lot of people got butthurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's a unfortunate side effect of adding money to anything, because money naturally, for a lot of people, not everybody, but for most people, creates an emotional element to their decision making. So they're going to become very protective of their bag,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
but
so interesting.
I just interjecting really quickly. Like, I think that like a huge attractor is going to be the money, and like we want to have the liquidators like banding together outside the realm. I think that's going to be something that's like, really exciting. And like the Gotchi family, like, we're cruising together as a guild, and I want to have this dynamic. I'm just looking forward to it.
Yeah, working together. I mean, I worked on a game where the Gotchi gang, stronger with your friends, banding together to protect each other and all that stuff against a common enemy, which the common enemy could actually be its own family. And then, like you're saying, like those people who are on that side of the fence, which ironically reflects the current state of world affairs, especially in the location you're well aware of is at war right now, but which is no joking light matter for sure. But how do we do that in a way that keeps it fun, but also keeps the essence of gotchis? Because when I look at those gotchis, I don't see like, blood and guts and darkness. I see like, you can be sad and you can lose stuff and all that, but it still maintains this minimum level of happiness because it's an escape. And you may be investing in this escape, so of course you want return on your investment. You want to be disappointed and all that stuff. So to Hefe's point about the Axie Infinity stuff, we definitely don't want to go down that route, which is great that everybody can learn from that mistake. But on the other hand, even just as a fundamental sort of thematic narrative for this experience, like how dark do we ever go with stuff? These are the kinds of questions that I'm constantly thinking about, because it's easy to come up with interesting ideas, but interesting ideas that fit within this umbrella is always the challenge. Like, how do you keep it gotchi-like, so that when it's introduced and when it mingles with all the other things that are already in existence, how does it complement and support those? So this is the kind of stuff that we as a development team constantly ask ourselves and work towards with all of our designs. All this input you guys have provided is super valuable. Every comment everybody's made and question is useful. It's either reflecting what I'm thinking or affirming it or bringing up something new. So I'm glad.
I have a question for you, actually.
You're hosting this. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're the experienced one here in the game design and development part of it. How much of an effect on player base do you think it has if we make a decision to keep this game friendly? Because like Axie Infinity got that huge, it blew up in terms of players because it was competitive, and that does like play in. And although that toxicity might come into effect, like, is it worthwhile to reach mass adoption and have this really scale up all the way?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's really something that I look towards Golden Cross and Coder Dan to lead, because they've led this endeavor thus far with the brand, and that is a very important core question. I have my own opinions about that. I think, from my perspective anyway, and this is not speaking towards our direction just personally, but along the lines of what I was just saying, the further, if basically the bottom line is what you're interested in, then all bets are off with certain considerations. Where all of a sudden now you're like, well, so maybe when something dark can happen, whether that has implications on your investment, let's just leave that aside for a second. I know that's important, but once you start going down that route where getting mass adoption, which means generating more money for the universe and the economy and all that stuff, you're going to change your opinions about what you think is appropriate or not. So an example of keeping that space more friendly, yeah, that could prevent it from becoming more mainstream and keep it niche. But on the flip side, if this community continues the way it has been, which is sort of a shining example of what a community should be, that in and of itself may attract more people and more players and eventually lead towards mainstream in a different route. Instead of hey, we have explosions and breasts in our game, like taking that route of the sort of trite way of making money. I think there are other ways to do it. And if I had to pick a project to do it in, to basically take a risk like that, I would pick this one for sure, because it has such a strong appeal, as has been mentioned, at its core. So it's almost like I don't want to say you can't make the wrong decision, but it's sort of guiding you in a certain direction. So anyway, that's my perspective. Good question.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, because I feel like it aligns very well with what I've heard from other teammates. Like Gravy, he's always, he's director of marketing. He's always saying how like the most important thing to a project is the community, and our community is so strong and friendly. And as I onboard more and more people, they reflect that back to me, telling me like, because it's, if you go into any other Discord, it's a mess. Like, yeah. And with us, we tend to keep it civil until we get a very controversial DAO proposal, and then the claws come out a little, but we still always revert back to being kind to each other.
Yeah, I think if that's maintained, that's it's almost gonna be like a what is that called in racing? A slipstream. Like when you race, I've been watching NASCAR. I don't know why I can't think of the term. If it's slipstream, where you're riding behind and then you propel the car in front of you. I think that's how the community and the dev team are going to work with each other. It's almost like shake and bake, baby. I don't know if you've seen Talladega Nights, but
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, on speaking to that point, I think the fact that we're even thinking about what are some of the apprehensions people have about games like this.
Yeah, totally.
And so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, which I've had conversations with team members about. So, as I mentioned, my background is in mostly video games. And the traditional way of doing it is you don't share stuff with the community. You here it is, it's all done. The loaf of bread is baked, and here's the finished thing. And love it or leave it, there it is. And then you build up your marketing plan to build up hype so everybody gets excited about it, and you release it. And then some people are like, what is this crap? And other people are like, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing since sliced bread, even though this bread is sliced. So that's the avenue that most of my career has been. I've of course worked on iterative projects like mobile, especially where you release things quicker so people can get their feedback. But it's an exciting part of this process because I don't know how much of you have followed the about how the traits should work based on what's been released so far, but just tons of discussion about that stuff. Some really very intelligent, laser-focused, super meticulous feedback, and that's great because it not only gives a personal opinion about that person sharing that stuff, but it also can speak towards what people are more interested and less interested in as they react to that feedback. And that's, to your point, that's only going to make the experience better because not only does it make us feel collectively like we're building this together, you have sort of more of a personal stake in it, even though, well, actually you do, because, if you've invested in your Aavegotchi or land parcel and all that, you have a vested interest in this being a better product, and better is so subjective that your opinion will always matter. So that's a great sort of synergy.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to actually hit on that another point in part of making sure that we can remain civil as a community is like keep doing what you guys are doing, and instead of baking the bread and then giving it to people, reaching out to the community and being like, all right, so we got this flour, we got the water, like how do we make the dough, and that's kind of it seems like what's happening with the input that you're getting. I think the only caution I think when rolling things out is maybe it's easier to increase rewards when they're not enough than it is to decrease rewards when it's too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's going to be a consideration.
Yeah, there's people dedicated on this team to the economic planning, which is super critical to that point about the entire economy and how each part plays its role in that developing economy over time and projecting forward so that there isn't too much of a surplus, there's enough demand, so that you can support the whales and then the smaller investors too, and everybody can still have fun.
Before we get too far, were you hunting for the word drafting?
Oh,
you
yeah,
spoke about the slipstream, where cars will draft behind another to get the pull and reduce their energy.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I failed the draft, but yeah.
Yeah, runners and bikers also do that. They draft behind people to get a little bit less wind resistance, especially recumbent bike riders who are trying to break records. They usually are behind like a pace car so that they get that extra. Which is like cheating, but I guess, we can ignore that. But
well, so is doping and all the other stuff that, splitting hairs.
Yeah, I think for our community, I think like there's going to be some want and need for some degen behavior, but I think we'll get that when we get to the PvP portion of the game. Like I envision a world where we're having arena battles and I can live stream them and do commentary, and that's like, yes, we have this like everybody gets a little dirt if they want, but it's more like the gladiator experience almost, but without people necessarily getting nasty. We'll all we'll experience it almost like a cult, like because we're all there together, kind of experience this like epic thing. Like when we saw during one of the hangouts, Coder Dan and Jesse did a Portal War live, and it was like, holy crap, there was like $3,000 on the line, and Coder Dan won and got a saddle chair out of it. So it was very high stakes. So it's like, yeah, we can. I remember that it was a very charged hangout because we were all just like, yeah, gambling. So we can get doses of it and we should be fine.
Yeah, that's another great point. I'm looking forward to that too. So how excited are you? Is everybody about PvP versus PvE? Like think bosses. So not player controlled, but they exist as a character. Are you more excited about, well, I'd rather there be a human on the other end of that thing, so I feel like it's more unpredictable and there's more strategy you couldn't possibly program unless you're Elon Musk and his team. So what direction would you prefer? Like you like the liquidators and the gotchis and then everything related to that in PvP arenas and so forth? Or is there room, do you think, for stuff like more traditional bosses and such?
I think it's a both answer as well. I mean, I'm really excited. For the PvP stuff to have like competitive play, but I'm also excited for like if like you could have bosses as well. But honestly, to get to like the mainstream, like you need to have the competitive side so that there's an incentive for like these big guilds to come in and have like hire people out to play the game and compete.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it also very much depends on the type of gacha you have. Like my main gacha is not going anywhere near arena because he's just built to like sit and maybe farm. That's it. So if I have that kind of gacha, I'm probably not too excited about anything that might risk some of my reward. But I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about it. Like I remember playing Sonic, right? And when you're collecting those coins, if you hit something, you lose all the coins. And you never really thought about it. It was just part of the game. You get another life. You have more coins. But now, those coins are your yield. So it's like kind of terrifying to experience that. But if we weigh it the right way, like maybe you drop just some of your Alchemica or part of your Spirit Force, not like, my $1,500 martini or something like that. Like that is not so risky.
Yeah. Now that's an excellent point. That's very relevant. We've been going over that stuff with a fine-tooth comb as these traits are being further developed with the economy because it all ties together. Like the Alchemica, the parcels, it all leverages one another. So when you speak about your investment and then what's too risky or what's going to disappoint people, very aware of that. It's also challenging.
It is interesting when you have money involved, but I think also the other safety net of all of this is when things go wrong, the community is able to come together. I really do believe, and I don't say, when things go wrong, but maybe when things don't go as the community has expected. I mean, a good example would be the boosts controversy that happened over a week or two was actually quite entertaining, but also people were fired up about it as well. But what got people to put aside their differences after all that was said and done and come back together as a community? I really think it speaks to what Master Yang was saying way earlier in the conversation. I don't know if you were here when he was talking about mimesis and the power that relation to things outside of Aavegotchi, outside of the Polygon ecosystem, things that branch across other blockchains, across other communities. I think that's what's going to really be like the binding aspect, like the glue that's going to keep people together, is that they're able to have this commonality with people, not only within their guilds, but I mean, like I have a Chainlink Aavegotchi, and I've actually struck quite a few conversations with Chainlink people that don't have Aavegotchis. So that's going to always be fresh and attractive to people, I think.
Yep. Good point.
It's another interesting thing I was just thinking about. Like we're talking about our community and our community, how friendly it is. But if we really think about it, our community right now is a class of friends who own Aavegotchi assets, where a lot of players that are going to be entering the game are going to be renting Aavegotchi assets via maybe a guild like CGU. So that they might not necessarily reflect the culture of our community because they're not technically, they're in it, but they're not really technically in it because they're part of another community, CGU. So I wonder how that outsourcing will affect our community and, what the preference for gameplay is, because we might want that friendly game experience and just easy farming because we're investors. But, the guys who are working in guilds, they're not investors. They're employees. They might want a different, role and, response from the game.
Yep. Excellent point. It's going to be interesting to see how this evolves and what safeguards we can put in place to try to assist maintaining a supportive environment while still allowing people to not be robots and have to do things a certain way.
Yeah, I guess the good thing is that our community is the DAO, so we'll always have the voting rights as the asset holders, even if other people are renting them. We'll ultimately have the say in like kind of how we dictate.
I think that DAO aspect is also another big differentiator between what we're trying to build here in a Web 2 game, whereas you get almost zero input with building your game. You're trying to meet people's expectations, and then you deliver a product at the end and hope that their expectations are met. We're kind of going through more of it's a painful process going through some of this stuff, for some people to say, well, I'd rather have this instead of that, and then going through the debate and then the snapshot votes, and then moving on to the next thing and kind of going through all these little, I can't remember who said it, maybe it was Webb, that you're kind of building the plane as we're flying. But what that ends up with is, in the end, hopefully, you end up with a product where people have very little protests about what's been created, because all of that was done during the building process. And so it might take a lot longer to build out something like Aavegotchi compared to maybe the Web 2 version of whatever Aavegotchi was. It might take a lot longer for us to build that out, but I think in the end, you're going to end up with a lot more happier people.
Yeah, I think in general, I would agree with that. But then also factoring the fact that people can be fickle. People can be like, well, today I feel like ice cream and today I feel like steak. And like, wait a minute, I thought you were a vegan. So as people contribute and they're like, yeah, I think option B, definitely option B, 100% option B. Well, maybe C. I don't know. Wait a minute, let's just keep going. Some people will be decisive, and then maybe the votes will go in that direction. So because it's a vote, there are going to be inherently some people who won't necessarily be happy with the outcome. But the fact that everybody has a chance to contribute, I think that's the underlying point, which you speak towards, which I think is ultimately going to make this a healthier situation where even if somebody doesn't agree, they at least in the back of their mind feel like they have contributed or had a chance to contribute. Who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, everything will be like DAOs. So the novelty will wear off and then people will be just like they are before there were DAOs and then get pissed off. Who knows? It's interesting, the cycles of psychology.
Yeah, there's some things that in the human condition that you just can't escape, right? So that is the interesting part of it, and to see kind of where that goes, if we're going to come back full circle or if we're just going to escape certain aspects of the way things used to be, you know.
Yeah, but to your point, though, I think if we can stick together as we progress, I think things will definitely be better in the short term and the long term, even if they do end up taking longer. But yeah, I think if there's progress, that's the key thing. I've got to take off in a minute, and I appreciate the opportunity to have blabbed as much as I have, but this super awesome feedback, everybody. And I do want to end with one little tidbit. Something cool is coming soon. I'm going to leave it at that. Been working hard on something that I think you're going to like. So I can't tell you any more than that, but yeah.
Heard it here first.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Well, thank you for your time and sharing with us, and also letting us express our opinions. And you're always welcome to come in here and jump in. And I love to hear some of your thoughts behind this stuff, especially you being one of the deeply involved in the production of the game. It's always interesting to connect with you. So you're always welcome here. And thank you today for hanging out with us.
Appreciate you as the host and everybody else in here. I love the enthusiasm and the supportiveness. So I look forward to being able to keep listening and to contribute when I can. Thanks.